Live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the program. Crashing out. British MPs vote on leaving the EU without a deal a day after Theresa May's devastating defeat. Shock factor. The UK unveils crash-out contingency plans, including a major slash to tariffs. Barnier exclusive. Europe's chief negotiator talks to Euronews about the debacle Brexit has become, prolonging the pain. Should the EU agree to extend the deadline after the UK snubbed a last-ditch deal? And Farage under fire. Brexit's poster boy is in the hot seat in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, first, she lost her voice, and then her political allies, and then her Brexit deal. And there may be more bad news to come for the UK's embattled Prime Minister Theresa May. In just about 2 hours, she faces another crucial vote, now this time on taking a no-deal Brexit off the table. The UK and the rest of the EU were left to reflect on after another humiliating defeat for Theresa May, after her Brexit deal was crushed by an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons last night. And in case you needed a reminder, there are just 16 days to go before Britain leaves the EU. And there's still barely any sign of compromise on anything on either side of the channel. Right here in Strasbourg, anticipation of tonight's vote, reaction to last night's defeat, and the prospect of a Brexit extension dominated the day. Let's take a look.
I don't see any better solution than the withdrawal agreement with all the clarifications given. So now this is where we are. Of course, we will remain in this position to want to do as little harm as possible in a very harmful process, because Brexit is very harmful to the United Kingdom and to the European Union.
Again and again and again, we are discussing in the European Council mainly about Brexit and not about China, not about the trade to Trump, not about the real issues which are important for the citizens of this European Union. That's why we cannot continue like this.
Let's stop bashing London. There are experts in this House who continuously bash London. Here's one, Mr. Farage. There's one, Mr. Verhofstadt. There's no difference in their approach, in their criticism to London. Secondly, I think it is time that the Commission finally admits that they have some responsibility for Brexit.
It seems to me that Britain seems to be spinning out of control instead of being back in control. And I think that the only reasonable way, Mr. Henkel, to solve this problem, and you didn't talk about that, unfortunately, is that there is cross-party cooperation in British politics the fastest as possible, a compromise, a common view between Labour and the Conservatives. How you want to solve an existential problem like Brexit if it is used by both parties to kill each other? For them, Brexit is a bullet in a weapon.
Today we are in the hands of the British political system. They should tell us where they want to go from now. The solution will have to come from London.
We've had enough. We've seen the snarling anger towards our country of Mr. Verhofstadt, the bureaucratic intransigence of Mr. Barnier, the constant stream of insults that come from Mr. Tusk, and we're of one mind. We don't want to be governed by you.
Now, Europe's chief negotiator was also outspoken during that debate, saying the treaty negotiated this week is the only treaty available to the UK. And following the debate, Michel Barnier sat down with Euronews' political affairs program, Uncut. Here's part of that exclusive interview with Daniel Cohn-Bendit.
Do you believe in any deal after all what happened? Frankly, do you believe in a deal?
But the point is to know what the UK wants. It is my answer to this question depends clearly on what the answer of the UK side, what they want. If they want to leave the EU in an orderly manner, if they want to leave the EU as decided by the Brexit referendum in an orderly manner, that means that this treaty is the only one possible. the only deal.
Can you renegotiate something?
No, we can't.
Page 120?
No, we cannot renegotiate because it's not our document. It is a common, agreed document with the UK government. So it is the best and the only deal possible if the UK wants to leave the EU in an orderly manner. The other option is to leave without a deal. In that case, this document will be no longer useful. But my personal feeling as a negotiator is to protect the interest of the EU side, the EU business, the EU citizens, the EU local communities, the farmers and so on, and also in the interest of the UK side. We need this deal because it's the only way to organize and to limit the consequences of the Brexit.
But what will happen now? They said they refused the deal, they refused the agreement on the agreement on the agreement, they refuse everything.
Generally speaking, Daniel, I do not like the speculations and the speculators. So I don't want to speculate. Let me just say that now the impasse where we are has to be solved by the UK side. Huh?
And which sign did I give you?
No, they are waiting for a new vote tonight and a third vote tomorrow. The second vote will be about to vote against the no deal.
Yes.
Okay. And tomorrow to ask for a prolongation of the negotiations. And the answer for the EU side will be immediately for what?
Yes, but for what? Prolongation. I can't understand. I'm a EU citizen. Prolongate for what?
It could be a technical prolongation because if the deal is voted, they need some more weeks to implement.
But then they vote the deal.
Okay, they have to first of all to vote the deal. It is a prerequisite. Could be a tactical, a political prolongation. In that case, I know the answers and the reaction of the EU side, the EU leaders, the EU Parliament. What for? Why do you need a prolongation? So it is for organizing a new referendum, new elections or not? I cannot answer to this question at the place of the UK government.
But we have a problem. We will have the election, European election. But can you imagine organizing an election in Great Britain for the European Parliament because they have to leave?
The only point is, at this stage, the answer to the prolongation will be the responsibility of the EU leaders by unanimity, European Council, next week or a little bit later. The only legal point I want to mention, to inform you, is that if the prolongation is long enough to go after the European election end of May, at that moment, at that time, the UK will be a member state with all the rights and the obligation of a member state.
So they will be obliged
in particular, let me just mention this point, in particular to protect the citizen rights of the EU citizens living in the UK. And these citizens have the right to vote. The same for the British citizens in the EU. So if the UK will be at that time member of the EU, it will have to organize the European election.
Well, you can watch the entire interview with Michel Barnier tomorrow night on Uncut with Daniel Cohn-Bendit. That's at 10:30 p.m. CET on Euronews. All right, joining us right now in the studio with some reaction is Nigel Farage, British MEP from the Brexit Party with the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group, and Marietje Schaake, Dutch MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. All right, I'll start with you, Nigel. This is what Mr. Barnier was holding up there.
Yeah.
The deal. It's final. It's not going to change.
Let's just get this right. It's not a deal, it's a treaty. And this is something that's been underestimated. So what the House of Commons was asked to do last night was to vote to leave one treaty to sign up to a new treaty. And this treaty, in many ways, would have bound the UK in. It would have meant taxation without representation. Even the Lisbon Treaty had Article 50 within it, by which we could leave. With this, there was actually no way out. So the House of Commons was quite right to reject it.
And that's the best that the UK is going to get from the EU. Do you believe that?
Michel Barnier's intention from day one was to keep the United Kingdom as closely tied to the EU single market and customs union as he possibly could. He's led the Prime Minister, cleverly, down the garden path, and we have said no to it. Now, I think logically, in the short term, The only way Brexit gets delivered is we leave on WTO terms. In the longer term, I think what we all want, really, is a genuine free trade agreement, but not membership of a political club, and that's what that document did.
Maritje, this is the best deal that is going to come out of the EU. We saw a last-minute, last-ditch effort from Theresa May. None of that is going to happen. I think Michel Barnier has made that clear. And you think that, indeed, this is it. This is the last night. If the UK doesn't accept this, they're not going to get anything more.
This is the best deal that's on the table. It's been negotiated by Mr. Barnier, but on behalf of 27 sovereign states versus one state that is in complete disarray. And I think it is true that this is what's available. The clarifications have been given. The addendum has been given. More is not possible. So let's see what comes out of London tonight and then what the consequences will be. Because if people don't want a no-deal Brexit, they don't want this withdrawal agreement, then maybe they don't want Brexit.
Well, the interesting thing is this. There's a very big difference between what the people want and what Parliament wants. It's perfectly clear.
You don't think Parliament represents the people?
No, not at all.
Oh.
And that's the fascination of where we are now. 77% of MPs voted Remain, and nearly all of them still maintain that position. So there's a really big disconnect opening up here. What is obvious tonight is that the UK Parliament will vote to take no deal off the table, although, and this is crucial, it doesn't change the legislation that is still in effect, so we still could leave on those terms.
But why not do a second referendum then if you don't think the Parliament represents the people?
Well, it doesn't at all, no. And that's why we had a referendum in the first place. And the frustration, the annoyance, is they are willfully not carrying out the will of the people. But what's happening in the country is really interesting. And that is that now, no deal is by far the most popular option. You know, the last opinion polls, about 45% want to leave with no deal. And I can't see, unless there is going to be a complete betrayal of the Brexit vote by the UK government and Parliament, that we can do anything else but simply
Nigel,
leave in 16 days' time.
You would rather a crash out?
No, I'd rather leave.
Yeah, but that would mean a no deal, which would mean
I'm sorry,
crash out.
you are using words like crash out. I'm using words like clean break, independence. So you can view this how you want to. Actually, and here's the truth of it, I mean, we today were voting on a lot of legislation, getting ready for a no-deal Brexit, in terms of banking, flows, aeroplanes. Most of those scare stories are out of the way, and I don't think there's much to fear, frankly.
You say it's scarce. I'm going to get to you, Maritje, but you say scare stories. But
yeah.
We're talking about assurances that the UK wants from the EU. What assurances can you give to the people of the United Kingdom that this leaving nicely, as you would put it, is not going to cause economic chaos? They're not going to suffer from a long period of time.
We'll be leaving the European Union, we'll be leaving the single market, and leaving the customs union. And they are all the things that we debated ad infinitum in the referendum, the biggest democratic exercise in the history of our nation, and we made a decision. We backed it up in a general election, 85% of people voting for parties that supported respecting the result, and then 500 MPs voted for Article 50, which says we leave on the 29th with or without a deal.
Maritje, what do you think of what Nigel is saying on this point, that people in the UK actually want a no deal, that is the best option for them?
Well, you know, I'm surprised to hear on the one hand that the referendum was the biggest democratic exercise ever. On the other hand, that the Parliament doesn't represent the people, even though the elections actually confirmed the Brexit.
Because they lied.
Well, there was a lot of lying going on, wasn't there?
They said they would respect the result, and they're not respecting it. It's quite simple.
Okay, Maritje, what about extension? What about the view of extending this from the EU's point of view?
Yeah, well, I mean, extending for what, I think, is the key question. If you look at the chaos that we see in London now, the disagreement, only agreement on what people don't want, then you have to ask yourself, what would the real question be? And what would the reason for extension be? And then also there has to be unanimity for that. And I think one question would be, is have you talked to, for example, your friends in Italy, asking them to veto that kind of extension?
I think what's interesting, without me doing that, is I was quite shocked this morning. I was quite shocked meeting Michel Barnier and the Conference of Presidents. There's been an assumption in the UK that if we ask for an extension, the EU would just say, yeah, that's fine.
Well,
what I was getting today...
We don't know that.
No. I'm saying I think we're wrong on that. What I got today was a very strong impression, and it backs up what you're saying.
I'm asking you whether you've asked your Italian friends about it.
I'd be very happy for it to be vetoed. Very happy indeed.
I think the question of the extension of Article 50, as you were both pointing out, we would like to know what the rest of the EU thinks about that, because, you know, there's a lot of questions on whether it should be a short kind of extension or a long kind of extension. All right, we did try to find out what MEPs here in Strasbourg thought about that, about extending the Brexit deadline. Our correspondent, Shona Murray, went out to talk to some of them here in Strasbourg, and she's joining us now live. So, Shona, what is the mood from MEPs that you talked to about an extension?
Well, I think, first of all, when you speak to some of the MEPs, they were expressing their frustration at the level of the defeat last night in the House of Commons. There had been some optimism that perhaps Theresa May was able to get this re-engineered withdrawal agreement across the line. After that, the next question on their lips was an extension, the inevitable nature of a request for an extension and what that would look like and whether they would consider supporting it. And they said they would, many of them, depending on for what it was for. Emotionally speaking, they said they want to get, finished with the business of Brexit as soon as possible because it was, creating an obstruction in terms of the European Parliament elections. But they mostly said they would be willing to give the UK an extension just to prevent a no-deal scenario. So take a listen to what they said.
If the UK want a substantial period of time to set out a new approach, I think we should give them that time, irrespective of the European Parliament election. That's a secondary issue for me. What's more important is to see if we can resolve this issue in a timely way.
We have to find a way to come to a solid solution. And Theresa May should, and that will be asked by the European heads of state and government, she has to demonstrate in which way she would like to guarantee to find a solution.
Giving them some extra weeks, if that could do anything to at least see to that we've tried all possible options, it would be reasonable to do it.
I think we all would agree that every possibility at all should be given to the British, even an extension if so. But what we really need now, as in really need now, is to have some kind of justification for this extension.
Honestly, if we are going for an extension, I believe that if it is a short extension, I think it's pointless because we will end up going around in circles, as I have seen happening in the past days, weeks and months. But if it is a longer extension, then everyone needs to understand what would be the purpose of a longer extension.
Is what kind of an extension would they give into? If it was just a few more weeks to get the withdrawal agreement across the line, I think most people would be quite reticent to approve that because there wouldn't be anything clear that would have changed in terms of the circumstances in the House of Commons. If there was a request, if the UK decided to change its red lines, perhaps Theresa May spoke to the SNP and the Labour Party, then there's definitely an open-mindedness for that. Talks of a 21-month extension creates its own major complications with regard to the European Parliament and the impact on that. But definitely, even though there is frustration, you could definitely get a sense that there's pragmatism, that MEPs, no matter what side of the divide they're on, do want to help the UK. Because, of course, the impact for no deal would be huge on the European Union, not just economically, but also in terms of citizens and in terms of the relations between the two sides in the future. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, correspondent Shona Murray and the MEPs that she talked to today. Now, if we hear just a taste of it, of what MEPs think, and Marietje, you pointed out that it could be a pointless exercise if you extend, and for what is a good question. And at the same time, Jean-Claude Juncker said, you know what, the possibility of a no Brexit is on the table. So if we take out all the negotiations, no more negotiations, we're left with no deal or no Brexit. Are those the two options on the table now?
It looks like it, unless we get a proposal of sorts, for example, a second referendum, which I suppose you would support as one of the biggest democratic exercises.
I think that's going to be the demand.
Yeah.
I think when Theresa May goes next Thursday, that's what's going to be asked for. And the problem for her is if she was to go for the option of an extension with a second referendum, I think she fears that would be the final straw for her own Conservative Party. But I do agree that's what's going to be asked for. Yeah. We don't need it, of course. We've had the referendum, but I do think that the screws are going to be on Mrs May next Thursday.
And what if 60% votes against Brexit?
Well, they're not going to. I mean, if we have another referendum...
If they do,
no, but let's say they do, just for a thought exercise for the moment.
Thought exercise is you promise the people You have this vote, we'll implement it. You back it up in a general election. You then have 500 MPs vote for Article 50. There have been 3 major events here supporting Brexit. The idea that you don't like the results so you rerun it is fundamentally anti-democratic and wrong. We're not a banana republic. We are the United Kingdom, and we should honour this result.
Yeah, but I mean, in the process of honouring the result, which is not an entirely clear process if you look at what's going on in London right now. So what if tonight there's a vote against a no-deal Brexit? Then there's no support for the withdrawal agreement between the 28 member states. So then there would be a referendum and possibly an election.
Well, tonight's just to be clear on this, tonight's vote, it's symbolic, but it's not actually, in legal terms, hasn't any force at all. Right now, there is still an EU Withdrawal Act in place, which honours Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and it says, the law of our land is, we are leaving on March the 29th, with or without a deal. The only person that can change that is Theresa May. She might, but at the moment, we're set to leave.
Is there anything that could change in the United Kingdom that would make the EU reach out again and say, OK, we're going to give a little bit more?
But hold on, why would the EU have to reach out? I think the UK has to reach out with a concrete question. So if political parties together making up a majority, because they still represent the people, and would have a specific question, then that could be a possible negotiation. But so far, the result of the negotiation is right there at the table, and it has taken a long time. Now, if people don't want it, that's their choice too. I mean, I look at it with pain in my heart. I think it is a complete unraveling. I think it will go down into history as one of the biggest disasters for the UK and the EU. So I look at this with a lot of pain. Of course, we differ greatly in opinion. You also think that Donald Trump deserves a Nobel Prize, so it shouldn't be a surprise that we
more
disagree.
Than Obama ever did, certainly, yes.
We disagree on many things.
I tell you what we're going to agree.
Oh, well.
And that is that next Thursday night is a major moment. Because, actually, if Mrs May comes and meekly asks for an extension without a plan and isn't able to offer a second referendum because of the implications for her own party, you may find, with or without my help, that there is a veto there, and then we will be leaving.
With or without your help, but let's talk about it.
We will be leaving with no deal.
Let's talk about that. I think it's so interesting, because you asked for it so clearly today, and there's a speculation that you have reached out, or through your teammates.
That you will run for that.
There's so much speculation about what I say and don't do.
Why don't you clarify in person right now?
I haven't spoken to anybody yet, but I'm thinking about it very carefully. And you've encouraged me, thank you.
Would you answer this directly then, Nigel? If you extend beyond the European parliamentary elections that the UK has to run, will you run again?
Oh, yes.
You will?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Of course.
No question. I mean, I'd rather not.
All right.
I'd rather not. I'd rather we got Brexit and I left the world of politics. But
all right.
if we're betrayed, I'm back.
We'll have to leave it at that for now. A lot more Brexit coming up on Raw Politics. Well, we'll go live to Westminster for more on what to expect in tonight's no-deal Brexit vote. Plus, what a UK plan to protect its economy means for UK consumers and European exporters. Do stay with us.
The ayes to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
Well, that was a look there at the moment last night when Theresa May was dealt another humiliating defeat. Tonight, she is bracing for yet another big vote on Brexit, and this time on whether the UK should block a no-deal departure. And after arguing for almost 2 years to keep a no-deal on the table, the UK leader has now had a change of heart. Well, Theresa May started the day at Prime Minister's questions, but she lost her voice entirely by the time the no-deal debate started. Let's hear how they both played out.
The Prime Minister's deal has failed. She no longer has the ability to lead. This is a rudderless government in the face of a huge national crisis. The Honourable Member for Broxbourne recognised it, saying, and I quote, "The government is not fit for purpose. We're not doing what we need to do, which is govern the country properly and effectively." Where the Prime Minister has so obviously failed, this House needs to listen to the country. So can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what her plan is now?
The Prime Minister!
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, I continue to believe that the House today will have an opportunity to vote on no deal. They will then have an opportunity tomorrow, depending on how they voted tonight, to vote on the question of the extension of Article 50. And as I said last night, there will be hard choices for this House, but this House will need to determine what its view is on the way forward. As far as the government is concerned, we want to continue to work to leave the European Union. That's what we deliver for the people on the vote of the referendum. We will continue to work to deliver leaving of the European Union, but to deliver leaving the European Union with a good deal.
All right, that was the Prime Minister's questions there. Now, let's cross live to Westminster and join our UK correspondent, Vincent McAviney. So, Vincent, 2 years of insisting that no deal is better than a bad deal. I mean, we've heard this so many times before, and now it seems Theresa May has a change of heart. Do we have a sense of how the MPs will be voting tonight, if they will be voting to crash out or take that off the table?
Good evening, Tessa. Theresa May has said that line in pretty much every speech she's given on Brexit over the past 2 years. But as we heard there, her voice was breaking. She made fun of it, saying while she was losing her own, she was speaking for the voice of the nation. And she will be voting tonight to block no deal, but she'll be giving her own MPs a free vote on this. So it's unclear at the moment what exactly the tally will be. We're expecting it to be blocked, but she had to have Michael Gove, one of her ministers, someone that she previously didn't get on with in the David Cameron government and quite relished firing when she became Prime Minister and then had to bring him back. He had to open up this debate, and here's what he had to say earlier on.
The motion commits the government not to leave on March the 29th without a withdrawal agreement. I hope that is clear and unambiguous. But the motion also makes clear that the default position in law is that we do leave the European Union unless we can secure assent to a withdrawal agreement, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, it was so disappointing that we did not secure a mandate last night.
Could he now attempt to answer?
Well, I'm joined now by Lucy Thomas, who is head of Brexit policy for Edelman, and you worked on the Remain campaign as well, the deputy director, and Tom Newton-Dunn, who is the political editor of the Sun newspaper. First of all, what do you think will happen in tonight's vote?
Well, I think we have seen before that there is a majority in Parliament against no deal. But I think what's interesting is that you have these amendments so you could see a straight vote against no deal. I think that one is sort of slightly harder to read. But I think the government's proposal that you want to take no deal off the table, but you want to have a deal, which is sort of Theresa May's version of it, I think there is certainly a majority for that. But I think if you get this amendment going through, I'm sorry, it's so complicated. If you get the amendment going through, I think then there's a question about what the government does.
And Tom, the Malthouse agreement, which is also being voted on tonight, what's your sense on that? Are MPs, because it's got cross-party support, but are MPs looking at it seriously, or is it going to get thrown out?
Well, there are two parts of the Malthouse compromise, and I won't bore everybody by trying to explain them all in my news say. The second part is what the Brexiteers are proposing tonight, which is effectively a managed no deal. It's a 2.5 year standstill in which Britain would leave the EU with or without a trade deal. Effectively, it's a withdrawal agreement without the Irish backstop, which is obviously the thing the EU have rejected outright, which is why Theresa May made it clear during PMQs today, when we could hear her, that is, that she wouldn't accept it either, wouldn't be voting for it. So I don't think it's got any chance of passing at all. Interestingly, Caroline Spelman has just tried to withdraw her amendment, which goes further than the government's, calls for no deal to be taken off the table forevermore. Speaker Bercow, having some Remainist sympathies, seems to have stopped her from trying to do that and saying, well, someone else might want to push your amendment, you've got co-signatures. So it's all pretty fluid, getting quite close to it, all quite exciting. I suspect it will go exactly the way we thought it would this morning, which is no deal taken off the table, and then we flick into tomorrow when the great battle to define Brexit afresh begins all over again.
And if we expect it to be blocked tonight, no deal, and then an extension tomorrow, where exactly does that leave Theresa May? What are her real options ahead of the EU Council meeting next week?
Well, I mean, I think the EU has been pretty clear that they are not up for renegotiating. They've said these are your problems that you've created in London, you need to sort them out. I think what we don't know is whether she would pivot to a sort of softer or different version? Because if you think about it, you can take no deal off the table, but unless you have a deal which is voted for in Parliament, there is still no deal. It has been said that there is a majority for a softer version, but whether she has the sort of political capital to go for that, and whether she goes to the EU and says, actually, I can get a customs union through or something, that all remains to be seen, because it's politically very difficult for her.
And Tom, just quickly, how likely do you think Theresa May could come up with something else other than her withdrawal agreement now?
Very unlikely, because she's really got no room for manoeuvre. She's not very flexible at the best of times, and she's made it clear. Number 10 have, Michael Gove this afternoon, all made it clear that they very much intend to go for a meaningful vote 3. What the House of Commons and Parliament tries to do tomorrow is going to be fascinating. An indicative vote is something we very much expect the Remainer Tories to try and do. She, however, has got one crack at trying to somehow keep control of the agenda. It's slipping away from her fast, and that's by defining tomorrow's motion. We expect her to do that straight after the vote tonight.
Thank you very much, both. Well, Tessa, that vote tonight taking place once again at 7 p.m. local time, and we should have the result at around 7:15.
All right, thank you for that, Vincent McAviney and his guests. They're talking to us from London. And joining us now in the studio to discuss this is Jeppe Kofod, a Danish MEP who sits with the Socialists and Democrats group at the Parliament, and Dan Dalton, a British MEP who sits with the European Conservatives and Reformists group. All right, I will start with you, Dan. If you go to the House of Commons vote tonight, actually, many point out that it's some would say pointless, but it wouldn't really have any effect, because if you look at the government's motion, it says that the default position of the UK, unless there is a deal, would be a no-deal Brexit. So basically, even if they vote to take it off the table, the default will still be a no deal. So can you explain what is the point?
Well, no, I mean, you need to go through the political process of voting against no deal. Then you're right in terms of you need legislation in the UK to ensure that the UK doesn't leave on the 29th, and you need a request for an Article 50 extension and the EU to grant that extension.
So the important thing is it indicates where the government is going to be heading.
It starts the process. Without that, you can't even start the process.
All right, so in the end, a no deal is still on the table, and an extension. I'd like to ask you about the extension, because this is what is being talked about here. What kind of justification can the UK bring to the EU for the EU to say, all right, we'll agree to that extension?
Well, if the UK comes up with some plan, what shall the extension be used for? You know, is there a new deal that is having consensus or enough support, majority support in the British Parliament, or is it an election, or is it a new referendum? Whatever. I mean, we need something concrete that would justify to extend the period.
What would get a yes, though? Would it be? I would assume that the rest of the EU majority, if not all, would want maybe a second referendum or maybe a no Brexit. I mean, what would be palatable to the EU?
I think what we first and foremost want is kind of in the British Parliament, the British politics have some kind of majority position that we can relate to, because we haven't had that for any time now. It's a second deal that May now have no support back home. So under normal circumstances, I would guess if a government cannot find support for a deal, they would have to ask the people either in a general election or maybe in a referendum. I think that would be the logical part. So we are waiting for some clearance. What is in the mind of Theresa May tomorrow? What is the plan of the government when we expect that they will vote for and not leaving without a deal? So what is now expected?
Yeah. All right, I would like to bring this up. This is something that's being talked about much more in the UK, but it will matter to the EU if this is presented. The Malthouse agreement, the other option, it doesn't look like it will pass. So what is it? It is basically, as was explained there, it's a withdrawal agreement, a no-deal scenario, but without the Irish backstop. In what world will that be accepted by the EU?
Yeah, I mean, where we are now, I don't think it will be accepted. I think actually the idea behind that from the start was sensible. Actually, if you take the backstop out of the withdrawal agreement goes through tomorrow, and then you can actually negotiate how to keep the Irish border open when you know what the future trade relations are. I think that's what's got us in this mess in the first place. But where we are now, yeah, it's clear if that goes through, it's not going to get accepted by the EU, and we're back to square one a little bit.
No, absolutely. And what about the chance of a third vote on Theresa May's deal, which has been put on the table, it has been discussed? What about the possibilities of that?
Personally, I think that's quite likely, to be honest.
It is likely.
Yeah, and I think that's probably actually the reason for the extension, which, if you see what the Prime Minister said, it's intended to be quite a short extension. And I think part of the justification for that is to try and give a little bit more time to get the deal through. Now, there's obviously going to be a lot of work to go on before we can get there. But there's a lot of pressure on the MPs that voted against the deal last night, because if it looks like the alternative to this deal is staying in the EU, many more of them may vote for the deal in the end.
But that's interesting because already the EU has said no more negotiations. That's it, no more.
But I think there'll be no change in the withdrawal agreement. I think that's clear.
Sure.
The only change that
it's the assurance of the assurance of the
exactly,
assurance.
but the only change that can come is, of course, if May comes to say, well, we want to be part of the customs union in one way or the other, and maybe find a majority in the parliament around that position. But then you say that would be betraying the Brexiteers. So I don't know. Wow. But I think, you ask how we think. I think coming from Denmark, we had several referendums. And I think in this situation where the politicians are not up to their task and can find a common position, then they should ask the people again. That will be the sensitive part to do. Ask them, you want to have a Brexit or you want to have this kind of stay in the EU, or you want to have a Brexit. Because when you had a referendum, originally there was no description of what is the alternative to leaving. What is the alternative to staying in the EU? There was no clear kind of vision. What is a Brexit really?
But that wasn't what the referendum was at. The referendum was whether we leave or whether we stay. We've made the decision to leave. Yeah. The question is now how we leave.
Yeah.
All right. We'll bring in another voice to this because, we've actually heard from the man many hold responsible for Brexit today, former UK Prime Minister David Cameron. He had some advice for Theresa May this morning. Let's take a listen.
Well, I've always supported the Prime Minister in her attempts to have a close partnership deal with Europe, and she continues to have my support. That's the right thing to do. Obviously, what needs to happen next is to root out no deal. That would be a disaster for our country, and to seek an extension, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen next.
Should there be a second referendum?
I think the Prime Minister... Look, what happened last night is... some people who've always wanted Brexit have voted against it again, and this is exasperating for the Prime Minister, and I think she should feel free to look at other alternatives for partnership deals and the like in order to solve this problem, because you can't go on with a situation where people who want Brexit keep voting against it.
I'll ask you, Dan, coming from David Cameron, good advice?
Well, he's got a point up to a point. The problem is the deal has some real difficulties in it in terms of it does preempt the future trade relations. It sort of keeps the UK in a customs union and splits up Northern Ireland from the UK. So there are genuine reasons why many people don't want to vote for the deal. It's not just Brexiteers deciding they don't want Brexit. It's actually there's real problems with the deal.
All right, well, everybody does seem to have an opinion on what to do, what Theresa May should do on this, on her deal tonight. All right, we have a lot more coming up on Raw Politics, a no-deal contingency. In fact, the UK announces its plans to protect its economy from a no-deal Brexit. But who will be paying the price? We'll ask that. That's coming up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the UK will slash tariffs on almost all of its imports to zero in the event of a no-deal Brexit. That was the message from the British government today as it tried to calm fears of surging inflation and a no-deal economic shock. Now, there would also be no new border checks on goods moving between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Let's take a closer look at the UK's new trading plans. Tariffs on 87% of all goods would be slashed to zero. That would still leave 82% of EU imports tariff-free, down from 100%. However, there would be new tariffs on a number of industries, including agriculture, beef, dairy, and the automotive industry. What will this mean in practice, though? Fully furnished cars imported from the EU would be subject to a 10.6% levy. All right, Britain's Brexit Minister Stephen Barclay defended the new tariffs this morning and denied that Northern Ireland would be treated differently to the rest of the UK. Let's take a listen.
No, what we've done is we've announced temporary measures, a modest liberalisation. At the moment, it's 80% of our trade which is on zero tariff. It will move to 87%. We're going to obviously listen to businesses in terms of what the impacts of that are. But these are the real-term consequences of the vote in the House of Commons last night. It does impact business. It does create uncertainty for business, and that is damaging to jobs of your viewers.
And it did not take long for the EU to hit back at that. Let's have a listen to what the chief spokesman of the European Commission, Margaritis Skinas, had to say about the tariffs.
The differential treatment of trade on the island of Ireland and other trade between the EU and the UK raises concerns, and in the event of no deal, the Union has already made clear that it will apply its normal third country trade regime to all trade with the United Kingdom and accordingly charge MFN tariffs on imports from the UK into the EU.
And joining us to discuss this is Irish MEP with the European People's Party, Sean Kelly, and still with us is British MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist Group, Dan Dalton. All right, I will start with you, Sean. You know, this, after all of the political wrangling and focusing on the votes of the day, are we actually staring down the barrel of what is the biggest issue here when it comes to trade tariffs, business, and how will it affect the lives of ordinary people? Let me just quote Carolyn Fairburn from the Confederation of Business Industry, and she said, "This is the biggest change in terms of trade since the mid-19th century." That is a massive thing.
It is, but we're staring down a lot of barrels at the minute because a lot will depend on what happens in the vote tonight, what happens subsequent to that. So I think issuing statements like this at this particular time, while they may be helpful in the sense of creating some type of certainty for British businesses, the reality is that this is a two-way street. Goods come into the European Union, goods come into the United Kingdom from the European Union. They'll have to sit down and work out a parallel regime, an equitable regime, and the European Union is not going to change its rules in relation to third countries without having an opportunity to work out a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So this is, I think, a lot of scaremongering in the broader sense, in European terms, trying to make the people at home in the United Kingdom feel comfortable, and in relation to Ireland, we're not really sure.
Is it scaremongering? I mean, we look at the figures, we're looking at tariffs either going up or going down depending on the industry and how it would affect businesses. Is it scaremongering, or this is very real now? It's as real as it gets.
But the UK has got to prepare for this. I mean, we are 2 weeks from a potential no-deal scenario. Now, it's my view that no deal will not happen, so hopefully this is all hypothetical. But the reality is we've got to have a tariff schedule ready, and this is actually quite a big liberalisation in some ways, but also not a huge liberalisation. I mean, it's only from 80% to 87% of goods now that are tariff-free. Many of them are very small tariffs anyway, less than 5%. So it's not a huge liberalisation. And what they've tried to do, I think, is pick out those really specialised industries that really need some protection, are quite limited, some agricultural products and cars, and wherever possible, be as liberal as possible on all of the
So this is not scaremongering, as Sean was saying. This is planning from your point of view.
In my opinion, it has to be done. You know, the impact and the way it's reported might end up like that, but the reality is it's got to be done.
It's got to be done. All right, let's hear from somebody, though, who would be directly affected by these tariffs. Thomas Cooney farms beef and dairy in Ireland, about 15 kilometres from Northern Ireland, and he's joining us now via Skype. Thomas, all right, we really would like to know how these, tariffs would affect people like you. When you heard about the announcement today, we knew it was coming when you saw the figures. What is your reaction?
Our reaction is it would have a detrimental effect on our business. Basically, 50% of everything that's produced on my farm in beef and dairy, 50% of it goes to the UK. And there's huge concerns among other farmers in other sectors. You have lamb and pork and chicken, poultry is being talked about as well. It's a huge impact because there's 300,000 jobs at stake in rural Ireland at this, and those 300,000 jobs need to be protected. They would be put in jeopardy because 50% of our product go into the UK, and we would need the EU to stand behind small countries like Ireland if this happened. And there would need to be a robust solidarity fund put in place to tide us over until we find alternative markets, which wouldn't happen overnight. So it's very worrying times for Irish farmers, and we'd be saying that it's time for the EU to stand together on this one and support us.
Yeah, Thomas, I understand the worries of our Irish farmers, but the negotiations have been going on for 2 years, and this was one of the possibilities that was being looked at. What did you do to prepare for an eventuality like this now that it could be real?
We have been liaising with our Taoiseach, with our Prime Minister, and we have been lobbying the EU Commission. We've been lobbying MEPs there like Sean. look, there's so much of it was out of our control. That is the problem. All we can hope for is at this stage is that, as Sean said, that there is some provision put in place that we will be able to trade, and we will be asking for those tariffs not to be implemented, that we would still have direct access to the UK market. That's what we have been looking for all along. Ideally, what we would want is continued access to the UK market. If that doesn't happen, if there's tariffs put in place, it's going to leave us uncompetitive. We're not going to be able to produce our food at that cost and pay the tariff on it. It wouldn't be viable. So if we don't get access to the UK market, we must have the EU must stand behind countries like Ireland. This is a time where the EU needs to stand together. We can't do it on our own. We need the EU to stand behind us on this one.
Well, I do want to ask you one more question. If these, because we are looking at some between 50 and 60% tariffs on maybe beef, dairy, and those products. How long can you personally sustain your business if these tariffs came into place? How long before you say, I'm in danger?
It wouldn't be very long, because this has had an effect on beef prices already. Because there is with the way sterling is at the moment, it's having an impact already. It's leaving the markets nervous as we stand. So we would need funding supports put in place immediately. We wouldn't be able to stand it very long.
All right, thank you for that, for joining us tonight. Thomas Cooney, he owns a farm just 10 miles from the border there, the Irish border. All right, let's talk about that. I mean, I think they're one of the biggest groups that would be affected. What do you tell people like Thomas Cooney now that we're very close to what possibly could be a no deal?
Well, I've said all along that I think there will be a deal. I think if the United Kingdom votes, and I expect they will vote tonight, not to leave without a deal, that will take some of the pressure off. And then we will have to try and work out what is going to happen. Anything could happen.
But they're already feeling the pain, as you say.
And I think this actually brings stark reality to what actually could happen. Obviously, from the European Union point of view, I will be ensuring that they will stand 100% behind Ireland, make available all the instruments that can help them in the event of a serious crisis, which there could be, things like intervention, market supports of different kinds, and also probably a weakening or a lessening of the state aid rules.
But isn't the point market liberalisation? That the UK wants to, to trade freely around the world, and if you're talking about intervention, I mean, that defeats purpose.
Well, this is the point. I mean, the tariffs that the UK is proposing to put on EU beef and the beef from the farmer there are much less than the tariffs the EU is proposing to put on UK beef. So the only way you can avoid this situation is by getting a free trade deal or getting some sort of deal that can be imposed. Otherwise, the UK would have to apply its tariffs, if it offered the EU something special, to every other country in the world, which would cause the same problems for UK beef farmers. So, we want much more free trade, much lower tariffs, but the EU is proposing to put on much heavier tariffs on the UK than these ones that the UK are proposing.
All right, I'll just quickly read this comment from the European Council of Young Farmers on tariffs. They say that this is potentially devastating on their businesses, and this just echoes what Thomas there was saying earlier. All right, a lot more coming up for you on Raw Politics, definitely on Brexit, challenging European Parliament's most prominent Brexiteer. Nigel Farage feels the heat in this morning's debate. That moment after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics and our special coverage on the Brexit, a very dramatic Brexit week. Let's cross over to our correspondent in Westminster, Vincent McAviney there. So Vincent, we had that vote yesterday that where MPs rejected Theresa May's deal, and tonight we are expecting a vote on whether to take no deal off the table. Can you just walk us through what to expect tonight?
That's right, Tessa. So what MPs will be doing at 7 o'clock local time once that debate is finished is having 3 votes. So there is a vote on the government's motion, and that takes no deal off the table, but still says it's no deal off the table if they can't agree by the 29th of March, but still says that there will be the default position of having no deal if in future the EU and the UK can't ratify an agreement. Now, the first amendment put on that takes away that catch-all, that it just says that no deal will be totally off the table now. So we're expecting that the government's motion will be put through, that no deal is now off the table to the 29th of March, and that leads to that extension vote tomorrow. But that first amendment, the Jack Dromey one, which takes it off permanently, we're not expecting that to get through. And then there is another amendment that will be voted on, the so-called Malthouse Agreement, after Kit Malthouse, who is one of the MPs in the Conservative Party. It's in basic terms, the Prime Minister would renegotiate the backstop element of her Brexit deal to replace it with a free trade agreement with as yet unknown technology to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, and it would have an extension transition period for an extra year until December 2021 to allow more time to agree a new trading relationship. So that's what MPs will be voting on, but we expect both of those two amendments I just mentioned there will be voted down.
All right, thank you for that, Vincent McAviney, our correspondent there. And joining me now to discuss this in the studio is Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. And still with us is Sean Kelly, an Irish MEP with the European People's Party. Well, Darren, you've been covering also from London. You saw the action there. Yeah, the sense about tonight's vote. And I mean, it is almost symbolic tonight.
Yes, it is. It doesn't actually take no deal off the table. In fact, no deal cannot be taken off the table at all unless there is another deal to replace it. But I think why MPs in Westminster are quite angry tonight, and some of them are, is because this is not quite what they thought they were promised. They thought a couple of weeks ago Theresa May had promised that there would be a vote on taking no deal off the table, and as Vinny has explained, it is only taking no deal off the table if there is no agreement by the 29th of March, i.e. by the default of using the extension to have these talks and negotiations and the Article 50 carry on till May, June, whatever. But the default position, of course, still remains no deal. So, in effect, tonight is a bit meaningless, really. The interesting thing is tomorrow, I think MPs will vote for an extension to Article 50, and then it comes back to this place. Not to Strasbourg necessarily, but to Brussels, to the heads of government, because, you know, I think they will accept an extension to Article 50, but the question is for how long, on what terms, and there's very little agreement across the EU 27 on what those terms and how long it should be for.
I want to explore the idea of a no Brexit, because Juncker brought it up the other night, and you seem to say, oh, there's not going to be a withdrawal at all. Do you think a no Brexit is a real possibility?
I think it's still a possibility. The happiest people I saw here last night and today were the Remainers from the United Kingdom, because they felt that this brought it a step closer to a second referendum. That's what they want, to give the people a second say, and then they may reverse it. That's what they hope. Now, that's just one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, and I think I share some of your views there, but the one concern I do have from listening to the debate today is that if the United Kingdom look for an extension, it can be given, but they're saying that it needs to have some basis for it.
Right. Justification, yeah.
I've actually said they should do the opposite. I said today they should offer an extension, because the United Kingdom obviously needs more time, maybe to get its own house in order, to do a thinking, and then we could do that without any difficulty until May.
Yeah, but just to add to that, what is interesting is, and this, because there is a strategy, I think, in number 10, is almost to have a third vote, potentially towards the end of this month, to try and get the deal that's been rejected twice through.
If it will possibly happen.
But the problem is that you can only introduce this legislation if there's significant changes to it. The EU has said we're not going to negotiate anymore, and it is possible that the Speaker will not allow that deal to be brought back.
And just very quickly, I mean, the Council meeting will be happening next week, and Brexit will take centre stage for sure.
Indeed, it'll be discussion about how long this extension should be.
All right, let's go to tonight's Raw moment, which comes from a fiery debate at the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, where MEPs reacted to a possible Brexit extension. Let's take a look.
And the only thing what we will do, we will give a new mandate to Mr. Farage. That's the only thing what we're going to do. That's exactly what he wants. Why he wants that? For two reasons. First of all, he can continue to have a salary that he can transfer to his offshore company. And the second thing is that he can continue to do his work, dirty work in the European Union, that is to try to destroy the European Union from within. That is the real purpose.
Well, there you go.
As much as they appear to dislike each other, and I'm sure they do, they are great sparring partners, Guy Verhofstadt and Nigel Farage. And I think deep down, there's probably a little bit of admiration on each side, because, you know, they are two very colourful characters in the European Parliament with very different views.
Exactly. Maybe two sides of the same coin, you can say.
Potentially. You said that. You said that, not me.
No, all right. OK, you can watch live coverage of the Brexit vote here, plus full analysis of the results right here on Euronews.